They declared me dead, filed the paperwork, held a silent memorial, moved my $6 million inheritance into an offshore account, and thought I'd stay buried. But I walked into that courtroom with evidence, not flowers. Hi, I'm Lauren Chen. I was erased by my own family because I refused to play by their rules. And when I came back from the dead, I didn't just want justice. I wanted the truth to burn. What happened in that courtroom stunned everyone, including them. But the story didn't end there. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments, and if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way, I can send you a special greeting. Now, let's start the story together. The envelope was thick, heavy in a way that made my stomach twist before I even picked it up. It had slipped through the mail slot while I was folding a load of clean towels, still warm from the dryer. My name was typed across the front, and in the top left corner, the return address read, Vermont Department of Health, Vital Records Division. I didn't remember ordering anything official, not from them. I carried it to the kitchen counter, brushing aside a sketch pad and a chipped coffee mug. I hesitated before opening it. That's something I still remember clearly. A second of hesitation before slicing the envelope open with a butter knife. Inside, I found a certificate, official, notarized, sealed in blue ink, and I froze. Name of deceased, Lauren May Chen. Date of death, June 12th, 2020. Cause of death, accidental drowning, San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. My fingers went numb. I blinked at the paper, thinking there had to be a mistake. Maybe it was someone else, another Lauren Chen, another life. But there, in faded gray type just above the seal, was my full date of birth, my social security number, even my last known address from before I left Connecticut. I wasn't dead. I sat down slowly, the death certificate still trembling in my hands. My breath came in short, uneven pulls. My fingertips had gone cold. Something in me curled inward, like my body wanted to protect the parts that couldn't quite absorb what I was seeing. For a long time, I just sat there, trying to make sense of how someone could legally erase me. Then it hit me. San Miguel. That trip. It was supposed to be a sabbatical, a break from everything. My parents had insisted on it back in 2020. They said I needed time to reset, away from the pressure of design work, away from the stress I'd apparently been projecting onto the family. The moment I landed, I lost access to my bank account. My phone stopped working 2 days in, and the hotel I was booked into lost my reservation. It was a week before I found stable internet, and by then, the silence from home had already begun. I hadn't thought of that time in months, maybe years. I buried it like most people bury things that hurt. But now, the truth was printed on thick paper with a raised gold seal. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted me gone. I reached for my phone and dialed the only person I trusted enough to call after 3 years of silence. Julian Carter, he answered on the second ring. My voice cracked. It's me. There was a pause. Lauren? I just received a death certificate, I said, gripping the counter with my free hand. In my name, filed in Vermont, dated 2020. Another pause, a shift in his breathing. I thought you ghosted me, he said finally, but you're saying... They filed it themselves, I said. My parents, or someone acting on their behalf. Julian exhaled slowly. Okay, let's not panic. But Lauren, that's not just strange. That's serious. Like felony level serious. I stared at the certificate again. It lists a cause of death, a place. It's not just a typo, it's deliberate. Did you keep it? He asked. Of course, I said. I haven't touched anything else. Good, don't shred anything, don't even bend it. I know. He hesitated. You want to tell me everything, or should I just come up there? I almost smiled, but the heaviness in my chest wouldn't let it rise. Let me call you back. I need to look through the rest of the mail. We hung up, and I went back to the small stack on the entry table. Junk. A magazine I never subscribed to. A letter from a law office in New Haven, Joseph Reed, Esquire, that I almost tossed until I saw the handwriting on the envelope. It was unmistakable. A heavy slanted script I hadn't seen since Calvin Dawson, my grandfather, passed away. Inside was a single sheet of paper. If you're reading this, it means your return was not on their terms. That's good. We have work to do. Joseph. I stared at the note. It wasn't emotional, wasn't long, but it confirmed what I feared and what I needed to believe. This wasn't over, and I wasn't crazy. Back in college, my father used to say, "In this family, absence means silence. Don't come back unless you're ready to be obedient." I thought he was being dramatic, controlling, sure, but not sinister. Now I saw it differently. They didn't just erase me. They had plans for what would come after. My sketch pad sat untouched on the counter, a half-finished blazer design hanging from the wall beside it. I used to think I had time, that I could live quietly and build something on my own terms. But that was before someone declared me dead on paper. Now the clock was ticking. I stood by the front door looking down at the snow melting on the steps. The sun had broken through the clouds just enough to warm the railings. "I'm going back," I whispered. Not to reconnect, not to ask for answers, but to show them I was still here. And this time, they wouldn't be the ones writing the story. The first thing that hit me when I stepped into Joseph Reed's office was the smell. Old leather, aging paper, and that faint, stubborn trace of peppermint lozenges he always seemed to keep in his desk drawer. It smelled exactly the same as it did when I came here as a teenager, fresh off some disagreement with my grandfather about college or career or the shape of my life. But this time, I wasn't here for guidance. I was here for proof. Joseph looked up as I entered, adjusting his glasses as if he didn't quite believe I was real. "Lauren?" His voice cracked just slightly. "In the flesh," I said, stepping fully into the room. "Surprise." He blinked twice, then pushed back from his desk and stood. "You shouldn't be here," he said, though not unkindly. "But thank God you are." I sat down without waiting to be offered a seat. The chair was firmer than I remembered, but it still carried the weight of history. I leaned forward, both elbows on my knees, and held his gaze. "They filed a death certificate," I said. "Filed, stamped, and mailed it. I have it in my bag if you want to see." Joseph rubbed the bridge of his nose, then reached behind him to grab a ceramic mug and pour coffee from the pot that had likely been sitting there for hours. "I don't need to see it," he said, handing me the mug. "I've seen the papers. I just never thought I'd see you." I took the coffee, more for the warmth than the taste. My fingers wrapped around the cup like they were searching for something solid. "So it's true." He nodded. "Your father filed for probate in late 2021, claimed you had passed, died abroad. No remains recovered. He said it was a tragedy no one could talk about." I nearly laughed, but the sound never came. Just a small, sharp breath through my nose. Classic Philip Chen. Joseph opened a leather folder on his desk and pulled out a thick stack of documents. "This is the original trust from Calvin. Your grandfather knew things might go sideways. That's why he set this up the way he did. You are the sole heir to $6 million and the Vermont property, but only if you're alive, and only if you stay out of the family business." "That part I remember," I said quietly. He looked at me, serious now. "You turn 33 in less than 3 months. If this isn't reversed by then, the entire estate defaults to the family trust. Controlled by my father and Derek," I finished for him. Joseph nodded. My fingers brushed against the edge of my coat pocket. I reached in and felt the soft, worn edges of a folded piece of paper. I pulled it out gently, an old sketch I'd tucked away during a layover years ago. It was a design for a silk blazer, hand-stitched edges, bold collar, something I dreamed of including in my portfolio once. The corners were wrinkled now, stained with ink and a tiny circle of coffee. I didn't say anything about it, just held it for a second before slipping it back. There was a soft knock at the office door. Joseph rose and opened it slightly. A man stepped in, tall but slouched, with tired eyes and a messenger bag clutched to his chest like it held something alive. "Kent Wallace," he said, offering me a faint nod. "Kent used to do the books for Walker Holdings," Joseph said. "He left after... well, I'll let him explain." Kent sat beside me but didn't look directly at me. He pulled a small flash drive from his bag and placed it on the table, followed by a second and then a third. These contain payroll records, tax filings, consultant contracts, and shell company invoices going back 5 years. I stared at the pile. "That's a lot of data." He gave a humorless smile. "Your brother and your father never expected anyone to come looking, and especially not you." "I was dead," I said flatly. He nodded. "They needed you dead because they couldn't control you alive." Silence hung between us for a moment. Then I reached for the drives and slipped them into my own bag. Kent cleared his throat. "There's something else. The money. It's been moving. Slowly. Quietly. Into a company called Calderon Equity. On paper, it's a development firm. In reality, it's a funnel." "For what?" I asked. "Risky overseas investments. Some of them legal, some of them questionable." Joseph looked at me. "You can't go public, not yet, but you can't stay quiet either." I nodded slowly. "So, we build quietly. Document everything, and wait." "For what?" Kent asked. "For them to make a mistake," I said. Joseph leaned back. "That might not take long." I stood, reaching for the papers Joseph had spread out on the table. I gathered them one by one, careful not to bend or crease anything. Then I turned toward the door. 90 days, I said, glancing back at them. "That's how long I have." "To do what?" Kent asked. "To come back from the dead," I said. And as I stepped out into the cool New Haven air, I finished the thought silently. "And take back what's mine." I didn't plan to make an entrance, but apparently when someone legally dead walks into a courthouse, people notice. The rain had turned the marble steps of the Fairfield County Courthouse into a mirror. I could see my reflection with each step, my black coat clinging to me, my hair pulled back, and my eyes set forward like I'd already made it through the worst. Joseph held an umbrella over both of us, though he walked half a step behind. Julian followed quietly, scanning the crowd. It was supposed to be a simple filing. Walk in, hand over the motion, walk out. But the moment I stepped inside, the lobby froze. A clerk behind the information desk dropped his pen. Another one looked up from his computer and mouthed something I couldn't hear. It didn't matter. Within seconds, phones were lifted. Someone whispered, "That's her." And just like that, the rumors began. The daughter they declared dead. The missing heir. The girl who came back. I didn't flinch. I kept walking. Room 402 was down the main hallway, past the portraits of retired judges and the faint scent of wet wool and old carpet. The hallway hummed with low voices. Reporters had gathered for some corporate fraud case on the docket today, but their lenses had turned. I could feel it. As we approached the courtroom, I saw them. Philip Chen stood by the double doors, speaking with Derek in that stiff, clipped tone I remembered so well, strategic and cold. Derek paced like a cornered animal, hands flexing at his sides. My mother, Margaret, stood a few feet away, her trench coat dry, her pearl earrings still in place. She stared straight ahead. She'd always been good at stillness. Emily stood beside her, pale, eyes darting, clutching a file folder like it was the only solid thing in her life. Philip saw me first. His mouth flattened into a line. Derek muttered something I couldn't hear, and my mother simply turned, blinked, and said my name once. "Lauren?" Not, "Oh my God," not "You're alive," just my name. I moved past them and approached the clerk's desk inside the courtroom. The clerk looked from me to Joseph, unsure if he should even speak. "I'm here to file a motion," I said, my voice clear, to revoke a death certificate issued in error, and to reinstate my legal identity. Joseph handed over the documents with practiced ease. The judge, a woman with silver-streaked hair and thick-rimmed glasses, adjusted her chair. "This is unusual," she said, flipping through the papers, "but not unprecedented." "No, Your Honor," Joseph replied. "The petitioner has documentation verifying she is alive and was incorrectly declared deceased. We have her government-issued ID, medical records from Vermont General, and a notarized letter from myself, dated 2020, confirming Calvin Dawson's intent to transfer assets to her." The judge raised an eyebrow. "This letter was never entered into probate." "Because it was intercepted," Joseph said calmly. "Allegedly," Derek cut in, stepping forward. "Your Honor, this is clearly an attempt to derail a legitimate family process." I turned toward him. "Legitimate process?" I said. "You tried to bury me with paperwork and a lie." He scoffed. "You disappeared for years. What were we supposed to think?" "You didn't think," I replied. "You planned." The judge held up a hand. "Enough. This court will not descend into family theatrics." She looked at me. "Miss Chen, until we verify your identity through appropriate legal and forensic channels, this matter is postponed. You will return in 30 days. The motion is recorded. All parties will be notified of next steps." I nodded. Understood. The judge stood. The bailiff called for recess. The room stirred. As I gathered my things, I turned one last time toward my family. "You buried me with a signature," I said, meeting each of their eyes. "I'm here to show you how I dig myself out." Philip didn't respond. His jaw tightened, his hands folded behind his back like this was a board meeting, not his daughter reclaiming her life. Margaret offered nothing but a blink. Emily looked down, but Derek leaned in toward our father as we exited. I caught the words, barely. "She wants war? Let's give her one." Outside, the rain had turned into a mist, soft against my face as I walked past the gathering reporters. One stepped in front of me with a notepad. "How does it feel to be resurrected?" I didn't answer, just kept walking. Because I wasn't back to feel anything. I was back to finish what they tried to end. If they couldn't keep me dead, they'd try to prove I was insane, subtle, elegant, and legally bulletproof, just like them. The envelope was hand-delivered this time, cream-colored, thick, embossed with the seal of the Connecticut Probate Court. It arrived mid-morning, just as I was adding sticky notes to a financial timeline Joseph and I had drafted the night before. I'd barely had time to make coffee. Inside was a summons. Petition for emergency conservatorship of adult individual, Lauren May Chen. Grounds: ongoing delusional behavior, erratic claims, inability to manage financial affairs. I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. I just folded the letter once, then once more, and laid it on the dining table. The rental I'd been staying in, an Airbnb tucked behind a florist's shop in Stamford, had become a war room. Files covered the surface, printouts, legal pads, medical receipts, flash drives in labeled envelopes. The window was cracked open, letting in the cool April air. The trees outside had just started budding, pale green tips trembling in the breeze. Julian arrived half an hour later. He didn't need to knock. He let himself in, holding 2 paper coffee cups. "I brought real caffeine," he said. Then he saw the summons. "Damn. They're going to say I'm unstable," I said calmly. "They filed the motion yesterday." He sat down, slid 1 coffee toward me, and took a breath. "Let me guess. They're going to use Mexico." I nodded. Back in 2020, during my so-called sabbatical, I spent 3 nights in a private clinic outside San Miguel de Allende. Heat stroke, exhaustion, and a panic episode that followed the loss of my passport. I hadn't spoken about it much. My parents paid the bill quietly, and when I came home, it was as if it had never happened, but I knew they hadn't forgotten. "They'll say it was psychiatric," I said. "Not dehydration, not stress, just instability." Julian leaned back. "We'll need medical records." The originals. I can pull a request through my channels. I glanced toward the bedroom. My suitcase was half unpacked. I hadn't even bothered with drawers. Everything about my life felt temporary. Joseph arrived an hour later, papers in hand. We're going to need a statement from the clinic itself. Originals, translated, signed, notarized. I've already called, Julian said. They'll send them by courier. The doorbell rang again just after noon. This time, it was Emily. She looked smaller somehow. Her hair was pinned up the way our mother liked it, neat, polished, but her face had none of that composure. She held a manila envelope to her chest like it might shield her. I shouldn't be here, she said, stepping inside. I said nothing, just gestured toward a chair. They're planning to submit reports, she whispered. Psych evals. From a doctor in Massachusetts. Except, he's never treated you. I stared at her. I overheard Dad talking to Bernard. Something about needing preemptive documentation in case you got too loud. Julian narrowed his eyes. What's the doctor's name? Dr. Alan Neary. Joseph turned to his bag, flipped open his briefcase, and began typing on a small tablet. He's real, he muttered. But we'll need to confirm if he's part of this. Emily placed the envelope on the table. I found this in Dad's home office. It's a draft of the affidavit they're planning to submit. Lauren's signature is on page 4. I didn't move. Emily opened the file and turned it toward me. There it was. My name. My date of birth. A signature I hadn't written. Below it, the claim. Subject displays persistent paranoia, fixation on unsubstantiated conspiracy, and emotional volatility. They're not just trying to discredit me, I said. They're trying to erase my credibility altogether. Joseph nodded. And if the court buys it, they can control everything. Julian looked up. No judge is going to grant conservatorship without due process. But that's not the point, is it? They just want to plant doubt. We sat in silence for a moment. The only sound was the hum of the old fridge and the rustling of papers in the breeze. They want to make me look like the problem, I whispered. Julian leaned forward. Then we fight smart. I'll go see Bernard. What? I said. Not officially, but he'll understand what we have. He knows me. He'll know what I'm capable of doing with it. That evening, Julian met Bernard in a parking garage beneath an office complex in Norwalk. He didn't take a recorder, didn't need one, just his voice. If she goes down, Julian said, we all go public. Every file, every transaction, every email Kent found. We're ready. Bernard, ever composed, adjusted his tie. You're bluffing. Julian smiled faintly. Try me. When Julian returned that night, I was sitting alone at the kitchen table, the lights dimmed, my coat still on. The affidavit was in front of me, lit only by a desk lamp. I traced the edge of the paper with my finger. Back when I was 12, my mother said, women who get too loud get institutionalized. She was only half joking, and now here I was, reading proof that the punchline had become a strategy. I glanced at my phone. A message from Kent had just come in. Found it. Email thread from Bernard to Philip. Subject line, Phase 2, preemptive discredit. It's real. I stared at the screen. Then I looked back at the affidavit. They're betting on silence, I whispered. Then louder to myself this time. Let's give them noise instead. When I started digging, I didn't expect to find pieces of myself forged into someone else's empire. It was a gray Thursday morning when the message came through. No name, just a string of numbers and one line of text. Archive 9, top floor, metal cabinet C, walk-in storage. I didn't need to ask who sent it. The burner number had popped up once before, 3 days after Emily slipped me the psychiatric affidavit. Her silence spoke louder than guilt. She couldn't stand next to me in court, but she wasn't standing with them either. That afternoon, Julian drove. Kent sat in the back, laptop balanced on his knees, typing out backup files and flagging timestamps. The ride to Bridgeport was mostly quiet. Wind howled against the windows like a warning, but none of us said it out loud. The storage building wasn't marked, just an old Walker Holdings logo half faded above the side entrance. The paint peeled in long curls, and the door creaked like a bad movie prop when Julian pushed it open. Inside smelled like wet cardboard and printer toner. The air was thick, cold. Rows of metal shelves lined the space, broken only by dusty filing cabinets and monitors that hadn't blinked to life in a decade. Kent pulled out a flashlight. "Top floor," I said. The stairwell groaned under our weight. Every step felt like walking into a trap. My gloves, thin leather, charcoal gray, tightened slightly at the wrists. I hadn't taken them off since this began, armor of a different kind. We reached the third floor, where broken fluorescent lights flickered intermittently. At the back, half concealed behind a pile of collapsed banker boxes, was Cabinet C. Julian opened it slowly, fifth drawer down. A red file folder with a single black label, Archive 9, Client Risk Reports. Inside, the paper was crisp, the ink dark. Contracts, letters, even passport scans, all with my name, all with my signature. But I had never signed them. Archangel Funding, full repayment due by Q3, 2023. Borrower, Lauren May Chen. Amount, $2,800,000. Terms, accelerated. Jurisdiction, Cayman Islands. Below it, a scanned signature, identical to mine in every curve. A forged passport scan was stapled to the back. Photo almost perfect, except for the expiration date. It had been fabricated to look like a routine international financing deal, but I'd never heard of Archangel Funding. Kent let out a low whistle. "They're good," he muttered. "Real good." He flipped through the folder, pulled out 3 more documents. Shell company ownership. You're listed as primary signatory on a series of transfers made to something called Legacy Recovery, LLC. I shook my head. "Never heard of it." He held up his phone. "Because it doesn't exist, at least not legally, but the transfers are real." Julian leaned over Kent's shoulder. "Show me the trail." Kent turned the laptop so we could all see. Funds moved from Walker Holdings' internal development budget, masked as consultant fees, routed through Legacy Recovery, then wired offshore. Here. He pointed. A bank in the Cayman Islands. Active account. Registered under an umbrella firm tied to an address in the British Virgin Islands. I felt sick. "This isn't just fraud," Julian said quietly. "This is federal-level laundering, with forged identity layered on top." "And if I hadn't found this?" I asked. "They'd have blamed you," Kent said, "written you off as unstable or complicit, or both." My phone buzzed. A message from Joseph. Injunction filed. Judge approved temporary freeze on all outgoing asset transfers. You've bought time. Use it. Julian nodded toward me. "We need to move." I took the entire folder and slid it into a hard shell envelope. Kent copied the files onto 3 separate flash drives, each labeled and sealed, one for the Attorney General's office, one for Joseph, one for safekeeping. We didn't speak on the way down the stairs. There was something sacred in silence when the truth had weight. Outside, clouds had begun to break, slanting sun across the pavement like gold lines on wet stone. Julian stepped aside to make the call. I heard only parts of it. His name, credentials, the words immediate concern, federal level, identity forgery. When he hung up, his face was unreadable. "They just escalated it," he said. "Cases moving to federal review, SEC, IRS, FBI. It's not just about the money anymore." I nodded, clutching the folder against my chest. The wind whipped against my coat, but I barely felt it. That night, back at the Airbnb, I spread the documents across the table. Legal ink and deceit arranged in perfect rows. These weren't just numbers or signatures. They were choices. Pieces of me, copied and twisted into a structure I never consented to, built by people who claimed to love me. I sat there until the sun went down, until the edges of the papers blurred into the shadows. Then my phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "They know you found it. Be careful." I stared at the screen. I didn't know who sent it, but I knew they were right. I walked into the courthouse not to reclaim an inheritance, but to reclaim my name. The courtroom was cooler than I expected, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above the wooden pews. Outside, maple leaves glowed amber in the late November sun, scattering across the steps like golden confetti. But inside, there was no celebration, just tension, quiet, brittle, and coiled like a held breath. I sat between Joseph and Julian at the plaintiff's table. Across from us, my family. Philip with his polished shoes and unreadable eyes. Margaret, arms folded tight, lips a shade too pale. Derek tapping his knee, head lowered like a boxer waiting for the bell. Emily sat alone in the gallery. The judge entered and the room rose. The case was called Chen v. Chen et al. And the fire began. The prosecution moved first, laying out the timeline. The falsified death certificate, the psychiatric evaluations from a doctor who had never met me, the offshore wire transfers in my name, the Archangel funding contract, signed with a forged passport scan. One by one, the pieces landed, each sharper than the last. Kent testified first. His voice was flat, careful. He explained the shell companies, the consultant invoices, the email chains labeled Phase 2. He showed the financial trail precise and undeniable. Then Emily was called. She stepped forward with a piece of paper in her hand and a crack in her voice. "I was part of it," she said. "At first, I thought it was just a way to manage the situation. But I knew what they were doing." She turned to me. "Lauren, I'm sorry. I should have spoken sooner." I didn't nod, didn't smile. Just let her words land where they would. Bernard went next. They showed him the payment logs, the messages between him and my father. His voice faltered. He folded. Right there on the stand. Said he'd take a deal if he could avoid prison time. Said Philip orchestrated it. Said Margaret looked the other way. Derek stood abruptly and slammed his palm on the defense table. "This is a circus!" he yelled. The judge didn't blink. "Mr. Chen, you're excused from the courtroom." 2 officers walked him out. Then it was my turn. I walked slowly to the witness stand. The room seemed smaller from that height, closer. I looked at each person, my father, my mother, the judge, the press, the strangers behind the glass, and I spoke. "I didn't die," I said. "I disappeared. I disappeared because I believed distance would protect me. I disappeared because the silence was safer than their version of love." I paused. But I came back. Not for money, not for status, but because I won't let them rewrite the story. What I rebuilt in that silence, my integrity, my peace, matters more than anything they tried to steal. The judge listened. Everyone did. The verdict came swiftly. My legal identity was reinstated. The estate was frozen, pending federal investigation. Philip and Bernard would be tried separately under criminal charges. Margaret was named a passive beneficiary, not a participant, but her reputation unraveled all the same. The courtroom emptied slowly. Emily reached out to touch my arm. I didn't pull away, but I didn't linger either. 6 months later, I opened the doors to the Dawson Initiative, a nonprofit focused on victims of financial abuse, particularly those harmed by family systems cloaked in prestige and secrecy. We started with 1 room, just a few desks, soft lighting, a coffee machine, and a wall of corkboard covered in sticky notes that read like small declarations. I'm not crazy. They don't get to decide who I am. Silence is not safety. The day we hosted our first community workshop, a package arrived. No return address, wrapped carefully in soft paper. Inside was a sketch, my old one, the silk blazer, the lines a little faded now, the corners curled, and a note. "You were always meant to lead." Mom, I stood there holding it for a long time. I didn't cry. Some wounds don't bleed, they just change you. That night, I pulled out a new sketch pad, not for fashion, for something different. I drew the blueprint for a women's resource center, shelter, job training, and legal aid all in one. I labeled the rooms with names like Clarity, Anchor, and Rise, because rebuilding isn't about going back. It's about choosing to build forward, with your name, your voice, and your truth intact. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't standing up to strangers. It's standing up to the people who once called you family. In walking back into that courtroom, I didn't seek revenge. I sought restoration of truth, of identity, and of self-worth. Because when we speak up, especially after being silenced, we give others the courage to do the same. And maybe that's how healing begins. Not by erasing the past, but by choosing who we become in spite of it. If this story moved something in you, I hope you'll share your thoughts. You never know who might be waiting for a voice just like yours to feel a little less alone.